What's going on, everybody, and welcome back into the podcast Philosophical Differences. Myself, Brenden Schaeffer. I'm alongside Josh Jacobs. You can find his work as well at the Dealin' the Cards podcast. Josh, how are we doing today after a Cardinals series win? That's the most recent thing that's happened. The Cardinals won a series. They did it against the Brewers. What can they say now? Huh?
It's
How are we doing?
crazy. Oh man, that's good. I mean, it's fun to watch some good baseball. When Nato was up with the bases loaded, I there's a text chain out there that Andrew exposed me and Sandy, but then
I
left out
saw
the
this.
part that he said incoming double play. But I was
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, here's a strikeout coming. Maybe VS2 can do something. And then Nato popped off, and I kind of kept forgetting like he's actually been pretty good since July 1st. So it's fun to see a little bit of a Nato resurgence. I mean, we can talk about the roster moves and such, but the roster, at least positionally, position group wise, kind of makes a little bit more sense. It's fun to see them play. I don't know if game two I call good baseball. I kind of feel like the Brewers kind of threw that game away a little bit, and the Cardinals tried to give it to them. So I'm glad they won the game. And then game three, obviously, Michaelis looked good, which you never know what you're going to get out of him. Offense came through at clutch in another spot there. I mean, you're still, even after a fun series like that, 10 games back of the Brewers, and you're 5 games or 5, 6 games back in the wild card.
Oh, I don't look at the standings anymore, Josh. I have not made a habit of checking that. And I think the Cardinals shouldn't either because
No.
honestly, just win. Just win,
Yeah.
baby. That's all you can do. And look, there are some folks tuning into this podcast that are probably like, "Well, why are they still talking about it as though the Cardinals could make a run and a push toward the playoffs?" Well, cuz like technically they could, but
Yeah.
there's just zero margin for error. And that's what's a little disappointing about the way the past week has gone. They have played all right. Like they played okay baseball. They didn't really play any games that I thought, oh, terrible. That Red
Yeah.
series was ugly. They got outplayed in every regard. The
Yeah.
Dodgers series, you can make the case that they were closer to winning it, maybe even sweeping it, than they were getting swept. I know they lost 2 of 3, and that's what
Yeah.
counts. So I'm not erasing that. But like they played solidly against arguably the best team in the National League, and then they followed it up by beating the Brewers. And I mean, that game one loss to the Brewers, they should have won that game because
Yeah.
you had multiple opportunities in the end, and obviously Goldie and Gorman strike out, and then that. I don't know that that's why Gorman gets sent down, but it kind of
Yeah.
felt like the final straw of okay, maybe we have to think a little bit about the utility of the roster. And we talk about Jordan Walker going back and everything, but you said it about the roster kind of making a little bit more sense. And the Luke and Baker spot off the bench, I don't know that he's going to homer every time, Josh, but that's kind of what I feel like Ollie Marmol had been looking for is just give me some utility where I can match up late in games. You give a manager who is able to exploit those situations a roster with which he can do it. I think Ollie Marmol then has the tools at his disposal to do a better job. And Cardinals fans, I know a lot of people don't like Ollie Marmol, but like this is kind of what I was getting at the whole year is
Yeah.
God bless Brandon Crawford. There was no utility to his role on the roster, and so now you turn some of that over, a little bit of roster churn, and you already see it's not like you've added a ton. You've added Luke and Baker and Jose Fermin. All right, let's not get too carried away, but that's something. That's something more than what they were getting out of their bench before.
Yeah, I'm curious. You said because it's a good point. Like, no one should really be paying attention to the standings at this point. You kind of got to go on a little bit of a run here before you even start counting the games back, counting the magic number here. But what what kind of sustained stretch would you need to see from the Cardinals before you start talking yourself back into, hey, like maybe it's not just mathematically possible, but like they could actually have a shot here?
Well, part of it is you have to look at the avenues in. And to me, there's only one, and it's the Braves faltering. I'll
Yeah.
say there's one and a half. The only other one is you do play the Padres 4 times. You'd have to sweep them to think that the Padres are going to be a team that could fade out of the wild card. And it's true. It's not like last year when the Cardinals were way back and we were asking Arenado questions and he goes, I don't really look at the standings. And then like 2 minutes later, he was able to almost recite the standings verbatim. So it's like sometimes they do kind of look even when they don't want it to be front of
Yeah.
mind. I genuinely haven't looked because if every podcast I do, I'm like, well, now they're 10 out. It just sounds very bleak. So I haven't even bothered with it, but I will look at it now for the sake of this show. Yeah, they're 5 out from the Braves and they are 8 out from the Padres. So, like, if you sweep them, you gain 4 on the Padres, and maybe then they would have to play some bad baseball in conjunction with that
Yeah.
to maybe have the Cardinals catch up. Even 3 out of 4, you go, okay, that's a 2-game swing. Essentially, you're not really catching the Padres, and I don't really think San Diego is looking to fade out. I don't think Arizona is looking to fade out. Those teams went on their runs, and I think that's going to get them into the playoffs. You've got one spot. It's the Braves spot. 10 out of the division. You play the Brewers 3 more times, and it's just impossible to think, barring like a Braves 2011 type of collapse in September from Milwaukee, you're looking at one spot. So what happens if the Braves are just pretty good the rest of the way,
Yeah.
right? Like the Cardinals to do like a 660 win percentage would get them to 86 whatever wins it would be. That's not guaranteeing you anything. And when you can isolate it down to it's just the Braves that you're really looking at, if they play above their head and get to 90 wins, you're done. So
Yeah.
that's where it's mathematically just win and then see when you get to mid-September if things are looking good. So that means series after series. They start in Minnesota tonight. Josh, I think they just have to win the series, and then they probably need 3 or 4 from the Padres. And if you have any point where you slide back, the only thing that saves you then is the 17 in a row type of drama. And I've said over and over, they've done that this century. I think they've used their allotment. So, yeah, I just don't think it to do like this day by day. Hey, well, here's how many far back they are. Just have a 7 of 9 or something, and then look up and see what the Braves did. And that's really all you can focus on. And that, like, they're going to scoreboard watch. We're going to do it out in the public. But I also think there is a simplicity of if you win a bunch of games, you might put yourself in a position. But short of that, there's really not a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I kind of tried to think back to how did I feel because we've talked about this last time. Like the Wilson Contreras injury happened, they go on a 7-8 game losing streak. May 12th happens, it turns around. But on May 12th, I didn't start believing in this team again. It was probably toward the end of May, early June, where I was like, oh, they could be a playoff team now. And it was a sustained run of success there where I wasn't looking at the standings every day to figure out how close are they, what are they doing. It just was a better form of baseball, and you saw some other teams fade in the race. So I think you're right. It's got to be a combination of that. You look at the Braves' last 10 games or 7, they've won 7 of their last 10. Like they're playing some good baseball. Does that sustain? Because if it sustains, it doesn't matter. Like I can't. Again, 17 game win streak. I've heard Michaelis like mention it one time. Like people like I think people throw it out there, but it's like that. It's not even just once in a century for your organization. That was what is it, the third best win streak of all time there? Like that's just not going to happen again. And even a 10 game win streak, I think it gets you in the race and you're really competitive at that point, but that doesn't even secure your spot at this point. What I'm kind of frustrated by, even though to your point, Luke and Baker, I think he could have a substantial role, but I wouldn't necessarily call it significant. And the Jose Fermin spot, I don't really know what to do with it. Maybe at some point, if they go this to JC route, maybe I'd feel a little bit better about the potential of it. But it does feel like, man, if you did these moves 2, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, and you bought yourself some time here, maybe there was a chance you can get back in it. Best case scenario in my mind right now is they look better down the stretch, and you're like, man, the way they're playing right now, they could make the playoffs, but they just dug themselves too far of a hole, and you're not going to be able to overcome that at this point. So maybe the Braves do fade a little bit, and you end up finishing 2 games back of them, and you're the better team right now, but they had the lead on you. And I just kind of feel like it's trending that direction right now, which honestly will be even more frustrating than if they just crater the rest of the way. Because it's like, are you kidding me? Like you held on to Brandon Crawford that long. You kept Nolan Gorman in the lineup that long. You kept running the same people out there. Again, we weren't talking about the middle of June here. It was the end of July, early August, where it's like, okay, like at some point you got to pull the plug here. If you're serious about 2024, you have to make moves that are about 2024. I get the argument that Crawford was the backup shortstop and there was the clubhouse side of things. I get the potential of Nolan Gorman, but anyone with eyes can see it was not working out and they decide to make the change now. It just feels too little too late for me. And that's the thing that's most frustrating about all of it. So I would like to see them play better down the stretch, but there's a part of me that thinks I'll be even more frustrated if they play better. Because it's like, what were you doing from post All-Star break till this past week?
Yeah, if they go on like a 90, 95 win pace from here on out, they're going to win with what 83, 84 wins, whatever it
Yeah.
would be, right? And that's going to be really annoying to your point because it does feel I don't love the characterizations of like the players and the coaching staff. They don't have urgency to win
Yeah.
because sometimes I feel like Josh, when they don't hit, it looks that way. It
Yeah.
looks very sometimes, and there is a difference where they will play sloppy sometimes. There have been sloppy games. There have been sloppy series, and that comes from fielding errors and outfielder kind of lackadaisical. Somebody gets an extra base on him. Like there are things that are very much you can look at it and say, well, that's not really urgency from an individual on a given play that doesn't embody Cardinal baseball and what that should look like. And so those criticisms are fair, but they don't care. I'm like, well, I don't think that's true. Well, they don't have any urgency. Every day, I think Ollie Marmol and his players have urgency. I could make a case that the front office has not had enough urgency this season.
Yes.
That's two different entities, But like, that's what we would be talking about to say, look, we all love Brandon Crawford. He's the clubhouse DJ. That's great. Backup shortstop is kind of what the role was, right? Insurance policy on Mason Winn, and a valid one at the beginning of the season. I was there in spring training when we were like, where's Mason Winn for a couple of days? He had a back thing, and it lingered into the beginning of the season. And when he was getting those multiple day off in a row sometimes, people would be like, well, what is Ollie Marmol doing? He's a young player. Why you just he knows the players better than we do outside. Like, we have to step back at points. However, we kind of seem to be, knock on wood, a little bit past that when it comes to Mason Winn. There still is some management there. Ollie still likes to get him a day off before or after a team day off to be able to facilitate the rest and recuperation that he needs, as he, 162 game season is different than any season he's had in the minors. So you're going to kind of be aware of that. And it was something that was talked about. You were there at winter warmup where he said, I want to try to bulk up a little bit weight wise because I tend to drop weight during the season because of all the work he's putting in. And it's sometimes kind of crazy for me to think about, but hard to eat enough to be able to maintain when you're working out as hard as guys like Mason Winn do. So that's a factor, I think, in all of this. But do you realize since July 1, if you saw my tweet, you can spoil it for everybody, but I couldn't believe this because I saw Jeff Jones tweeting about Sajaci and basically saying he'd only played like 9 games at shortstop since July 1st. And you'd think, like, if they were trying to get him integrated in the position, you might have done that a little bit more at AAA. And that's a separate issue. But Brandon Crawford, you know how many games he appeared at shortstop since July 1st?
I don't. I saw the tweet, but I can't remember.
It's 3. 3. He's the backup. And that's a better part of 2 months. So my point is, the utility for that role, not high. Well, who's the backup shortstop now? It's Brendan Donovan. You know how many times you're going to see him? Hardly at all. Because Mason Wynn's just going to play.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, where was the urgency from the front office? Because all he could have used that right-handed bat off the bench. Does Lucan Baker play a position? No. Does he have to? Not to be more valuable than Brandon Crawford, because he's not going to hit. And you can now have you had Matt Carpenter doing the bench thing where if he's going to come off the bench or play against a righty that he has a good matchup against, he can DH. Like, the bat, it has the utility at this point over, well, that guy could technically stand at shortstop if we need him to.
Yeah.
That's where it's frustrating.
And to your kind of, to not defend the front office, but like an annoyance I have sometimes is people.
Where's your water bottle?
No, it's I don't know where it is. I think I lost it, which is just a sign of how I subconsciously was like, I'm not holding the water anymore. I don't like sometimes when people, it's like you have I strongly disagree with the front office as of late. Think there needs to be change there. I don't think they do nothing though, and sometimes people are like, oh, they just sit and twiddle their thumbs all day. I don't think that's true. I just can't imagine what the conversation led to, where they didn't think worst case, like, what's the worst case scenario when you don't have Brandon Crawford? It's if Mason Wynn's healthy, it's like you said, 3 games since July 1 that you have to stick Brendan Donovan there, Jose Fermin there, God forbid, call up Thomas Sajaci.
And just have him play there, right?
Yeah, and it's like, whatever. And if Mason Winn gets hurt, it's probably over anyway. So it's like Brandon Crawford being at shortstop for like having that insurance, like, who cares? Like, at that point, you probably actually do call up Thomas Sajaci to throw him there anyways. So like,
even if he's not ready defensively, right? Like,
yeah,
I can get that he might not be super comfortable there. He told me in spring, I asked him about this because you could see it on the roster. Like, and he said, well, I'm more comfortable at second or third or whatever, but I played shortstop. I'll do it. Like, he's laissez-faire. He doesn't really care. And you know what? Brandon Crawford is not the epitome of range and athleticism at this age anyway. So, well, you're right. What are we doing?
Yeah, so that's the part where I'm like, I just don't know how, like, what was the reason not to? I at some point I get through May, like you said, when the back issues are happening. In May, June, I think you can afford the ability not to rush a Thomas Sajaci, right? And at that point, Jose Fermin, Brandon Crawford, I don't see too much of a difference there, so I didn't care as much. But then when you're getting to this point of the season, when there is some urgency there, I don't understand what the cons were here. So it's just stuff like that frustrates me, where it's like, I feel like one of the biggest critiques you can make of this front office right now is how they manage that 40-man roster and some of these roster crunch things, where it's just like, I think most of the time I'm an idiot and don't actually know how to manage a roster. So I'm not going to act like I know what I'm doing compared to these guys that live and breathe baseball and are paid a lot more than I am to do this job because they know more what they're doing. But some of this stuff, it's like, yeah, I think average Twitter user probably got it right over John Mozeliak here. I don't understand this one. So yeah, I could go all day about the Brandon Crawford side. I'm glad they finally made the decision, but again, it's slightly almost more frustrating that they did it now, because it's like, man, I don't see how doing it 2 weeks earlier would have made any difference or would have been more positive. I don't know what the negative was there.
Yeah, what's the risk? Is he suddenly going to turn it around and you're going to see a vastly different version of him. Like, I get it that it's hard to, you got a guy that's part of the team and you don't want to, like, that's a jarring move to be like, hey, this guy that's been on your team all year, he's not here now. But
Yeah.
they get it. They all understand that it's a business. And I mean, from day one, I can remember being on the patio at spring training when they brought Crawford in and we all were out there for like 15 minutes talking with him. And people would ask, different questions about, it was very clear that it was like, he probably should have just been given a chance with the Giants to be that role. And then when he
Yeah.
wasn't, it was like, well, his kids kind of still wanted him to play. And I guess I'll play. Can I find anywhere in Arizona to train? No. Okay, I'll go to Jupiter. Like, it wasn't, I'm not trying to dog Brandon Crawford, but I came away from that going, I don't know. Like, I don't know how this is going to, I guess, like, I guess I could see it, but you also could see it just being where if Mason Winn goes down and we don't have another shortstop in the organization that is AAA ready, we're gonna have somebody. And if you remember that same week, like Tim Anderson signed, I don't know if it was Ahmed Rosario, Nick Ahmed, just like a bunch of different guys signed, and the Cardinals the next day signed Crawford. And it was like, I think if they felt they were going to miss out, they had to get somebody because at the time, Mason Winn, we had never seen anything from him at the big league level, right?
Yeah.
His numbers at the stretch last year weren't great, but everybody just kind of knew and assumed it would be okay. And I was right there. And I said, if he could 95 OPS plus your way to like almost Tommy Edman at bats, that kind of value at the plate, then you'll be fine because he's going to be a great defender. He's been awesome. So, yeah, they I think just I don't know. They get kind of stuck in the mode where making a decision is the big challenge and trying to do the jarring thing. It does. I think it was my guy Jack that tweeted that, and I retweeted him when he said it seems like all these moves are coming a couple of weeks too late. And I said probably because they are like that. It is. That is the way that it feels, and I think that is probably the way that it is with the Walker thing. I guess it's been beaten to death, but I kind of want to circle back real quick to it and let me know if you see it this way, disagree with this, have anything else to add. But a lot of people are like, it should have been Luken Baker from the start. And I'm okay with that assessment that when Carpenter went down the first time, he doesn't play position, Luken doesn't, and now you've flipped one of your left bats into a righty bat, and that gives you utility. What they were insistent, and all he has said this, he said it to Tom Ackerman on the Sunday morning show on Camo X last week, trying to articulate why Jordan Walker is in this platoon role that nobody thought he should be in. And we still don't think he should have been in, and then they fixed it. But they wanted to add an additional right-handed bat against left-handed and starters, right? Because they could get 6 in the lineup. I think if we counted them, it would be Goldie, Arenado, Winn, help me out, Pajes.
And then Walker, right?
Walker would be the 5th, but there's some, who are the other righties on this
team?
Winn.
I'm
just Winn,
Goldie,
Arenado,
Contreras,
Contreras, obviously, and then who's Tommy Pham would be the 6th. Those are the 6 that they could have put in against left-handed starters before the Walker thing. And they said, we're going to call up somebody that can be the 7th. He's going to take the spot of a lefty bat in our lineup. But think about the lefties that would then have to sit for it. It's a second baseman or it's an outfielder. Those are the only. And so to accomplish that, it did have to be Jordan Walker or Fermin if you wanted to play Fermin at second or in the outfield. Technically could have been him, but I think they were so low on his bat. And now, obviously, if you compare it to Crawford, it's like, Fermin, great. And he had a nice moment the other day in their win. So that's all well and good. I think that's why it was Walker. And that goes to highlight, because we know his reverse splits, how minuscule the gain was, where people are like, well, why does it have to be a righty? Why can't one of your lefties just hit a lefty? Great. They would love for that to be the case. But if you look at the splits for Burley and you look at the splits for, Newt doesn't have bad splits. He's just not been the hitter that we expect him to be. So to try to get a Walker in there over Newt against lefties or over Burley or certainly over Gorman the way he'd been trending, that was their goal. And it felt like a very, straining your neck significantly just to try to do something that could gain you something very small at the cost of a week of Walker continuing to find his rhythm in AAA, which the organizational philosophy on that seemed to be, it's a week. It'll be fine. Carp's going to be back within 10 days, and we backdated him anyway. So it's going to be about a week. And so I really think that's how they viewed it as to why it wasn't. And maybe if Walker catches fire in that time, he's here to stay. But I think that's why they did it that way. But knowing that was such a minuscule gain for the risk and the annoyance and the PR of, you've already been accused of ruining Jordan Walker. Like, I don't know how much they should care about national media talking about this, but like with what Mark DeRosa said about MLB Network, he said like all the analysts there behind the scenes kind of talk smack about it and say, oh, the Cardinals think you saw the thing that he said about trading for Fetty at the deadline because he needs a fresh start. Like there's a narrative forming at MLB Network that they just think it's a Jordan Walker rescue mission. Get this kid out of here. That I don't know that that's entirely fair, but when you do things like this, it kind of is going to lead to that narrative being a little bit more prominent.
Yeah, I totally agree with that side of it. I think the only way they could have made it all work where you call up Jordan Walker and he's actually still in St. Louis right now would have required them benching Paul Goldschmidt. Because you could do the whole Jordan Walker plays against right-handed pitching, Brendan Donovan goes to second base, you send down Nolan Gorman, Alec Burleson plays first base, and then you have an outfield of Pham, Nootbaar, Walker, or Victor Scott, Nootbaar, Walker. Like that could have been a way to fit him in almost every day. And maybe it doesn't mean he like Goldschmidt's permanently benched against right-handed hitting, but it's like, hey, one of every 2 days, it's Walker or Goldie starting against right-handed pitching, and then they both start against left-handed pitching every time. I think that would have been maybe a more strategic way to do it with the long-term side of things. But then I think to your point, even if it all makes sense, if they knew this was what they're going to do a week later and send him back down, then you would have thought maybe they're like, okay, maybe we just go with the Jose Fermin route. I also think if they called up Jose Fermin for a week and it's actually maybe they do keep him up because you're going to potentially DFA Crawford the next week. So I don't know what would have happened there. I don't know what the backlash to that would have been like because people probably would have pointed to Walker, like that dude's mashing. Why isn't he the guy coming up?
Yeah.
So it all is kind of relative with that. I remember initially being like, this made no sense, but then as you like kind of think through the roster crunch side of things, fitting that right-handed bat in, it really did have to be Walker for me, not the Baker side of things. Or again, they'd have to play Pages less, but then again, you're taking the
Correct.
right-handed bat out of the lineup. So it's like, what's the pros and
It's still
cons there?
6, and they wanted it to be
Yeah.
7. And you might say that's such a why? People are really in some old school baseball folks, can't they just bat against everybody? And I get where you're coming from. I'm not trying to defend that that's what they should have done. I'm just trying to explain
Oh
why
yeah,
they
for
did
sure.
it, to be
Yeah.
clear to people who are like, "Why? It's a dumb idea." Well, it's not my favorite idea, but that is what they were aiming for. And then I think they realized, all right, now we don't have lefties on the schedule that we're facing anyway. Might as well have the guy who can hit lefties, Luke and Baker, be here because that at bat late is going to have some utility. And Walker, is going to continue to go back to Memphis and do well. Which, by the way, am I wrong? Last night he did great.
Yeah. He
Gorman,
had 3.
not as great.
If I told you before the season that Memphis would have a lineup with Jordan Walker, Ivan Herrera, Nolan Gorman, and Zach Thompson to be starting the game,
In
I'd
late
have been like,
August,
what on earth happened?
it's not what you want. I mean, it's not what you want. How would you have ranked it at the beginning of the year? Cardinals hitters, like most productive, because I think Goldie and Arenado still would have been my top 2. I was
Yeah.
deluded, but like right after that would have been Gorman, and then Contreras would have been like either. I probably would have had Gorman above Contreras, hand
Oh,
up, like
really?
maybe
Oh,
so. Just because he needs to hit 40 home runs eventually, I would have been wrong. Wilson
yeah.
Contreras, I would have, like I said, I would have been wrong. And now it's easy to say because we see Goldie struggling. I probably would have had
Yeah.
Arenado above Goldie, but maybe not. I'd have to go back and remember and listen back to what I said because sometimes I forget. But like he would have been in that top 4, Gorman for sure, of Goldie, Arenado, Contreras, Gorman. Order them how you please, and then Walker probably 5th, and
Mm.
even above Nootbaar I would have had, and even above.
Oh,
But you can
really?
look at Nootbaar and say, well,
Yeah.
Nootbaar is struggling. So if you had him any higher than 6 to begin the year, in just terms of productivity from the lineup, you'd be looking foolish. And then like Donovan. My point is, you can make a case that of the 6-pack of the hitters that were supposed to be their best hitters, 5 of them have woefully underperformed.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I remember going into the year, I was just so high on the offense that most of them I was like, are gonna have good years. But I remember thinking my top 3 were gonna be Contreras, Snoop and Walker.
Okay.
But I still thought I didn't think that I wasn't baking in a Nado Goldie major regression here. I
Yeah.
thought they would just be better than the projections were on that because I think a lot of them had like Nado slightly above league average and Goldie in kind of like that 10% range. And I thought they'd both be closer to 20. Like I thought this lineup could have 6, 7, 8 bats that are 20%
No.
above league average. And it's like,
Yep.
okay, they're gonna be out of the lineup at certain points. Like you bake in some Nootbaar injuries, you bake in some Gorman slumping stretches, but like the overall numbers are gonna look really good at the end. And then it all just fell apart. And I think you could look at it from 2 realms, right? Like it's like, well, do you really expect Gorman to be this bad next year? I mean, maybe, but like, could he figure it out off season? I think he'll be better. I mean, I think it's been so bad. I still have faith in his talent. I think Walker's going to be fine long term. I mean, do we have to adjust maybe the ceiling expectations? Maybe, but I also think he's still super young. So like I'm not going to give up on that yet. I still really love Brendan Donovan for this team. I think offensively he's been disappointing as of late, but as a player, he's still great. Newt again, has just been so below my expectations that you could flip it the other way. And when people think this team might lose 100 game next year if they don't invest in the team, like, well, they might honestly be the same type of team, but just ascending the other direction where it's like, hey, they're a year early and they're probably not going to make the playoffs this year, but you're kind of looking ahead toward, well, you've got some young pitching coming up and you can make some moves. You can invest in the team the other ways. And now, like the two young players that we probably had the most question marks offensively, what were they going to give you this year? And Mason Winn and Alec Burleson have been the two that have carried you. So now, who's to say they don't regress going
Yeah.
forward too? Like, so it's not all like let's paint it all as everyone's going to get better. But again, it's been almost like last year, was like out of the percentile outcomes, it felt like the one of the worst. Or was like this is the fifth percentile season. And maybe I'm giving them too much credit. Maybe it was more of who they were. Offensively, this feels like the first percentile season. Like, what was the worst possible case scenario? And then to move your expectations even lower than that. Because if you asked me what was worst case scenario for this offense, I probably would have said league average. Like, no way that they're historically bad runners in scoring position, can't hit left-handed pitching, and all their young guys are bad. And Goldie is just can't. It just like does not look like himself anymore. I've been like, that's crazy. Not all that's going to happen, and it did.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you do get Winn and Burleson doing equal or more, a little more than you would have hoped for median expectation for them. So, like, I would probably have it higher than the first percentile just because of those two. And
Fair,
Contreras has at least hit on expectations and maybe even exceeded a little bit. But
fair.
like I said, when you think about the number of guys that you thought were going to be prime contributors, you're like, oh, you're going to have Walker batting seventh or eighth, and he's going to be 115 OPS plus. Like, this is going to be
Yeah.
awesome. How can they not? And that's why I give a little bit of slack to Mo for, like, his job was to fix the pitching in the offseason, and they put together a pretty good bullpen, even though one of the key guys that they thought would be in it never threw a pitch for him, Middleton. And the rotation, it's not been good enough because they're going to be 24th in ERA or whatever for the rotation. They need to be more like 19th or so, but they had that. They were tracking toward that for a while. And largely the notion of keep our guys healthy and have durable workhorses has kind of came true. You knew it wouldn't for Matz, and so that's why you can ding him for that. They should have had a better plan for sixth starter, and they kind of fell bass backwards into Andre Palante being the answer at that. The only reason it happened is because he was not thriving as a reliever and asked for it when they sent him down. So, like, that, the planning on that front was not very strong. But with regard to the offense, I basically said, okay, you've constructed this rotation with a low ceiling but a pretty high floor. That can work as long as your offense is, and I didn't even think top 10 would cut it. I'm like, I think it'll have to be top 8, top 6, but I also think I can see the realm in which that happens. They haven't even been remotely close to that. And one of the big reasons is Paul Goldschmidt, and it pains us all to say it because there's nobody that cares more and works harder than Paul Goldschmidt. Promise you this is true. So, oh, Goldie doesn't care. No, but the talent gap or the ability to continue to do what he's always been able to do at the plate, there's been some differences there, and we can see them. But to that point, you wanted to talk about this a little bit today, so I'll bring it up. What is the best way to handle Goldie down the stretch? Because when you think about the gymnastics they were doing to try to get a little bit more from Walker, and that's why he's here, and it didn't make sense. It's because if you're Ollie Marmol and you're the staff, you're trying to win just every little edge you can have that day to win, which front office could have helped in maybe giving them Luke and Baker instead of Brandon Crawford previously, or Fermin or whatever. That might have helped that urgency. But if you're on the field staff trying to do it that day, that's a reason that a lot of the weird stuff seemed to be misaligned with the larger big picture goals of the organization when it comes to Walker. But to that end, like, now do you still need to be trying to win every single day? Probably so. I still think that's what's owed. And if you're Ollie Marmol, unless Mo has told him, hey, man, we just, you're all good, I'm staying, whatever, we will never know exactly what is being told there. But if it's being told that, hey, your job is safe here, we just need to think about 2025 and some of the moves that we're making day to day, you got to probably do what you can to win that day if you're Ollie. That being said, is maybe a little more Alec Burleson and some Luke and Baker at first base on occasion. I'm not saying every day you just, Goldie is banished, but is that part of what they could bake in to not only get a look, because I think you got to look at Luke and Baker a little bit to see what you have, and if you don't have much, then you can DFA him off the 40, whatever, in November. But if you plan to let Goldie walk and you have a guy who bats left and can play first and Burley, which defensively I think they need to look at that as well, because
Mhm.
people do not realize how much they're going to miss Goldie's defense if they do let him walk. But if you had a little platoony with those two, Luke and Baker and Alec Burleson, can make some level of sense next year with Burley playing 110 games and Burley playing 50 against lefties or whatever it is. Should you be looking at that a little bit? Should you be riding Goldschmidt until the wheels literally do fall off? Because maybe he turns it like what should the Cardinals be doing? I'll just turn it over to you.
I I can make an argument that whether or not they're trying to win every day or they're built looking ahead to 2025, that playing Paul Goldschmidt less, not necessarily benching him, but playing him less is the way to go. Because again, we have enough of a sample size against right-handed pitching right now. It is the end of August, and he just is not good enough. Alec Burleson mashes. You have other options. You could play in the outfield. You could do a Jordan Walker. You could. I mean, it's got the bench is a little bit thinner now, like in terms of guys you want to start every day. I don't necessarily know if I want to start Jose Fermin every day, but could you fit Luke and Baker in a DH? Yeah, you can convince me of that. I think that's a potential route to go. I also think too, if they kind of know in their heart of hearts this is probably the end with Paul Goldschmidt, then I'm also even less attached to him playing as often as you need to, because you're not trying to like maintain a relationship for this offseason to say, hey, can we bring him back in a platoon role or an everyday role, whatever that is that they look at there. Which at this point too, I'm honestly. I mean, this is a weird example. I don't know how fair it is, but like I think of like a Jeff Albert and how much criticism he got at the end. He's like, I'm just out. Like, I don't know how much,
Yeah.
even if Goldie midseason was like, I think I might want to come back to St. Louis. Like, the way it's trending right now, I don't know if he wants to come back to St. Louis because of the reception he's going to get. Again, this is me just like speculating. I know he's not a guy that's on social media and stuff,
He
so he
doesn't
probably
see
sees
it
it
at
less.
all. He
But
doesn't
he's
see
got to
any of
know
it.
that people are upset. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think he's oblivious to that. And also, too, I think he's a competitor and doesn't see himself as a bench platoon guy, not in an ego way, but I think he wants to prove himself. And if that's what the Cardinals are going to offer him, I mean, does Christian Walker leave the Diamondbacks and he goes to the Diamondbacks, or is there some other
Mhm.
contender? It feels like there's always a team that needs a first baseman. I just have a hard time believing he won't find a full time role somewhere. And if that means the Cardinals need to offer him one, sorry, frankly, at this point, I don't think that's a good idea. I think you got to see what you got in Burleson, and then also to your point, this year you got to make sure you can handle it defensively at first base. I totally agree with you that people are going to miss Goldie's defense. I mean, there's been a lot of highlight reel throws from Mason Winn this year where it's like, hey, if you didn't have Goldie there, that might have been an error. And I think Wynn's going to get better. I mean, Nato makes some throws sometimes where it's like the reason he can be so kind of like just let it fly is because he knows Goldie's going to find a way to catch it. So I think, and that stuff matters. And so I want to see Baker there more. I want to see Burleson there more, because do you need to go get a free agent platoon bat that's not Goldschmidt to figure that out? I don't know. We don't know until we see it. I also think remove from the Goldschmidt side of it, because we all know they're not going to fully bench him. That's just not going to happen. But what are they going to do with Lance Lynn and Steven Matz when they come back? Are they going to shoehorn Lance Lynn back into the rotation, or are they going to DFA him? Are they going to put him in the bullpen? Or are they going to be like, oh, his knee still hurts, so he's on the IL again? Matt's like, I feel like it's pretty clear they're gonna put him in the bullpen, but that hasn't been said yet. So at this point, I'm not gonna rule out especially with how things have gone the last few weeks. I'm not gonna rule out something that's gonna make me uh, turn my head a little bit and be like, that's the decision you wanted to make there. I think there's like those three veteran situations or opportunities for them to prove to us. Are they trying to win every day and honestly look toward 2025, or are they kind of playing the contract game again? I don't know. So what are you thinking? Like, I mean, Lance Lynn and Mats are supposed to be back anytime, right?
Yeah, I have no earthly idea. Like, you legitimately cannot take Palante out of the rotation
Yeah.
and defend it as we're still trying to win. You take him out of the rotation for Lynn or Mats if you want to be doing what you were doing with Wainwright last year and like, hey, nostalgia, baby. Lynn has been fine in his role this year. I'm not
Mhm.
dogging Lynn. I think maybe a little bit below what I expected, because I actually thought he could be like more front end of the rotation for this team, because I just believed that might be what they'd get from him. I think it's been a little closer to the middle, number 3, number 4 type of performance. Not enough consistency and probably not enough innings eating. In some of the starts, he kind of wastes too many pitches and has not been able to be efficient enough to get 6, 7 innings as often as you maybe would have hoped. But he's done all right. And I think he could easily just throw the bullpen, the live BP that he threw to Carpenter or whatever, and roll right back into the rotation, and it will be the same as it ever was. I don't think he doesn't need a rehab start. Like, he's not going to get one, and he doesn't need one. So that's fine. But Miles Michaelis would have been the guy I would have said, yeah, you probably put him to the bullpen, and then you revisit in the offseason. But he did exactly what they needed from him yesterday. And when he's working that way and inducing that ground ball contact, That's what makes Miles Michaelis great. So if he's kind of rhythming back into that zone, that's what you want in your rotation. Unless there's another injury where you have another veteran of the rotation that needs a quick 15-day to kind of keep fresh, which if you were 5-6 games up on 500, you might really be thinking about that because you want to make sure everybody's ready for a potential playoff run. Now you have to have all hands on deck to get there. I was thinking like even Matz was looking pretty good in his rehabs, but in his last start gave up like 4 runs in 5 innings. So what does that look like? I think yes, probably to the bullpen for him, but who does he replace? I mean, Matthew Liberatore has been nails recently. Can't be looking his direction. Does John King get the short end of the stick? Like, I don't really know, man. They've got, well, you remember the famous quote is we've got 6 starters. They're about to have 7. So I don't know, dude. It's almost comical because you can see it. Sometimes this front office and this team does feel like a Curb Your Enthusiasm sort of vibe, where it's not even necessarily their fault that Palante pitches so good that you'd look like dummies to sit him.
Yeah.
But then these other guys are like, well, hey, I remember I was in your opening day rotation too, but you've since traded for Fetty and allowed Palante to take a spot. And is he going to Wally Pip Lance Lynn from the rotation? Like, I honest to goodness have no idea. So I don't even I've barely brought it up. I keep bringing it up like, hey, the reason that no Sajasi, they say he needs to play every day. That's 1. But 2, there's not a 40-man spot because Matz is coming back and that'll be the Crawford spot. So just keep that in mind. That's the extent of my analysis on it because I truly have no idea because there's nobody that you can take out of the rotation.
Yeah.
Versus Will. Like, you could still take Michaelis out, but they will not after a game like that. And I'm not even advocating for it. It's Curb Your Enthusiasm because you're like, it's a Seinfeld. You don't really know. Like, it's not necessarily anybody's fault in this vacuum moment. There's been a lot of decisions that have led to this moment, but now you're like, whatever they do is going to be criticized and going to be wrong.
What do you think about this? Because again, I think we've talked about their margin for error is so thin that it's like, hey, like even if you bake in, like, well, what if Sonny Gray gets hurt? It's like, well, if Sonny Gray gets hurt, the season's over. What if Eric Fetty, even though he's been that good, it's like, well, the season's probably over. Like, I don't even know if depth is a big deal at this point anymore. It's kind of like you got to help. Like, this team just has to be healthy and perform the rest of the way. I don't really see another way to do it. I think you can potentially designate Lance Lynn for assignment, and then you're kind of done with it because I don't think you bring him back next year.
I don't think they want to. You know, I think they want Lance Lynn to start a game for them this week. You know what I mean?
Why?
Well, okay, let's look at his numbers. Let's pull him up because I'm not saying he's been incredible, but Lance Lynn's he's got a 4.06 ERA. He's had some unearned runs that he's allowed. His last time we saw him was on the knee that they knew already was going to require an IL stint. He gave you 5 one-run baseball. The one before that was 5 scoreless, 6-2 before that. If you look over, he did give up 10 runs one time. Who among us hasn't given up runs from the start, right? Let him cast the first stone, okay? But other than that day, Lance Lynn's been really good the last 5-6 starts or so.
Fair. But I guess
he's going to be good again. But the Cardinals are probably they love Lance Lynn. They brought him in for a reason.
Yeah,
so I don't know.
Like, you're not getting rid of Gray, right? Fetty's there. Palante should not be moved from the rotation. I mean, unless you want to go the Gibson route, but I don't see them doing that.
Let's look at his recent starts.
That could, because it's been worse for Gibson lately. But like early in the season, he was the guy you're like, wow, he's the second most dependable starter. So maybe it is Gibson.
He's gone on and off. He's had a good one, bad one, good one, bad.
Yeah,
but that's been the whole rotation. That's how you built it. I hate to be that guy, but that's how they built it. So I don't know.
But then I look like Michaelis has the contract and he's not going anywhere. So like that's something. Gray's not going anywhere. Fetty's not going anywhere. Palante shouldn't go anywhere. So at that point, it's like you have 3 names and like one of them has to go somewhere. Because I mean, I guess you could put 2 in the bullpen and you send down Leahy and you've already used King's option this year, so you could send him down too and then make it work. Yeah. So like, I guess maybe you put
more games. I don't know.
Probably not, but I don't know. You're right. It really does feel like a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode. But like, I think the contracts is where you could look at it. It's like if there's one guy they know they're probably not bringing back next year, that I don't think it's the worst idea to not convolute their any chances they have right now. I don't know. Gibson's the guy kind of been baking in that they'd potentially bring back. I thought there's no chance that Lynn comes back.
So do this. Let's say neither, because they're saving money. And whatever they're going to replace, maybe they'll sign a free agent, but it's like at Fetty costs $5 to $7 to $8 million. So who's your rotation in a world in which they bring back neither of the option guys, Lynn and Gibson? Opening day, what's reasonable? And like, if you wanted to say Quinn Matthews, go for it. But I think I'm more mid 2025.
Agreed.
I'm not going to say I'm ignoring him completely for 2025 because of the durability that he's shown. He's got the innings kind of where you'd want him to
He's
be.
24 already too.
He's
He's
not
not like
young.
young.
He played a bunch in college, so that's kind of I'm sometime next year. It wouldn't shock me if he's in there by July or so if he continues to progress. If
Yeah.
he stalls at some point, different conversation. But like he's going to be minor league pitcher of the year in the organization. He has to be, right? I mean, so
1000%.
you're talking about a guy that's really had a quick rise, but you're savvy. You're not going to say anything that you think is, if you feel like Quinn Matthews is, you're planting your flag, you can, but we're going to play the game where those two options are out. You can sign somebody if you want to, but just from who they've got, what do you think that would look like day one?
I mean, this would be assuming they don't go sign someone. I would say you go Gray, Fetty, Michaelis is in there, Palante, and then I think you have Quinn fight for one of that fifth spot. But I'm not like penciling and penning him in there because I'm not going to rush that. If he doesn't
Yeah.
look ready and I'm like, oh, his stuff's fun, so let's put him at like, no, like I would like to see what McGreevy has. I wouldn't mind seeing Graceffo in there. I wouldn't mind maybe giving Libator another shot at it. I mean, I kind of am out on Thompson, but like, sure, McLaughlinstein, sure. So I think there's enough guys like that you can have a fifth starter. Hey, Steven Matz. Yeah, that's true. So actually,
He's
it's like
paid.
you've got him under contract there. I do think he's a guy that's sneaky that could move off his salary next year because it's just 12 and a half. Like, I think even if you had to eat like 3 of it, it's like, well, you saved 8 million. I think that's probably worth it for you.
But do you think that because Lynn and Gibson's money is about the same as that, and they've already the one of the 3 they've committed to, and that's Matt's money wise, they have to.
Yeah.
Could that be a reason that they don't bring the other 2 back, even if they might like one of them better than Matt's or both of them better than Matt's, that they might end up going? That's the kind of situation that could happen in the offseason that we know. We've talked about the money. They don't want to raise payroll, but those are actual tangible ways in which the payroll stuff could impact the team.
So how much do you think? I mean, because I think people have varying opinions of this. How much do you think it's they're not going to raise the payroll versus they're going to take a significant step back in payroll? Because if they're not like, I could see it shrinking some, but I guess I'm not totally in the opinion that they're going to go closer to 100 million than they are where they're at right now.
What's the payroll? Do you know?
I think it's about 180. I think 178, something like that. I have Fangraphs up right now, so that could work well. But I feel like they usually tend to have the better of the public rankings on here.
Yeah.
The
roster resource tends to be the good.
Well, apparently it's only the team payroll here.
But then it's like the luxury tax payroll and
182.
Okay. Because
And so
sometimes
it's like,
my head, like
okay,
what's what.
You do have to bake in arbitration. So it's like that hard number's hard to nail down for me. But like you have Goldie coming off the books. You do have to have Gray's contract coming up 10 million or 15 million. So that kind of that's kind of like it's a little bit more Goldie money coming off, but with arbitration baked in, it's basically you don't even think about the Goldie
money. It's
a
wash. Yeah.
But if you decline the options on Gibson and Lynn, that's like 22 million right there for you. And I do think if it's a different front office, I don't see the Mosaic front office doing, hey, we're going to get rid of 3 veteran starters in one offseason. But like, could I see Hein Bloom being like, hey, we're going to decline these 2 options. We're going to eat 3 million on Steven Matz and save 8 million there. Now we have close to 30 million we freed up. I mean, you look at the roster. I don't really know. You could argue they should add some bats, but I just don't know what the clear fit is for that. I kind of think you run it back and see what happens. If you're not like, hey, this is a year where we're for sure going to make the playoffs. And then like, can you squint and see a Nathan Eovaldi in there? Because he's not going to command 30 million in a long-term deal. So like, is that like
though, right? I mean,
yeah, but you freed up 22-ish from those 2 guys. You can move Matt. So I think, again, I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think if there's a different front office in place that could get creative, and then I'm not in all that's baking in, they're not adding a single dollar to payroll over what they're already spending. So I think it's hard for me to really wrap my head around it until I can see what arbitration estimates are, because you do have a bunch of guys entering the first year in Arb and Newbar, Donovan, Palante, and Gorman, but that's probably like a $2-3 million range, not like a $8 million guy. But you have 5 of those guys who go from basically 1 million to 3 million. That's substantial. So anyways, people are going to think I'm like trying to like defend them for not spending right now. That's not what I'm doing at all. But I do think there's a world where they could spend 107, like go down to 170s. They're down.
I was going to say 10%, maybe, or maybe not even 10% reduction, but like 5 to 8% reduction where they're at, I don't know, 165, 170 million. I could see that. But I was looking at the ARB stuff. So what do you like? Helsley's going to get a jump. I mean, that's the
Oh
big
yeah,
one.
true.
But they could make an alternate decision on that if they're going in a different direction, which there will be people that say you should have done it July 30th because the market was desperate to have a guy like him enter it, and you could have landed multiple top 100 names. They didn't. They never were going to, so it is what it is.
Yep.
But Helsley, I mean, if he jumps to, he's at 3.8. If he jumps to 7.5, 8, maybe more, like I think that's probably coming. It could be more.
Yeah.
He's got, when you're the saves leader, and that's what they say, hey, that's what you value in ARB, and he's lost in ARB before, his side's gonna go, here are my saves. You want to try me in ARB? We'll go.
For sure.
So I think you're gonna get a pretty nice healthy jump from Helsley.
You're also
JoJo's gonna get one, John
you're
King,
gonna save $6 million from Giovanni's, because you have to pay that $500,000 buyout, but you're saving $6 million there from getting rid of him too. So like there are some, I would need to sit down and do some numbers gymnastics. Again, it's hard because I don't know what the arbitration is going to look like.
Right.
But like I do think there's a world where they could do something even if they're not adding payroll. It might be one thing though. So anyways, but assuming that's not going to happen, for me it's Gray, Fetty, Michaelis, Palante, and then you let McGreevy, Graceffo, Matthews fight for that 5th spot. If Matthews wins it, that's awesome because he might be better than a 5th starter for you already. Like he could come in and be like probably your 3rd best option, maybe even 2nd best. And I'm not saying like he's an all-star, but based on the quality they have in there, he could be really interesting. And then yeah, we'll see what this team looks like. But I would be very hesitant to say, hey, Quinn's in my rotation for 2025 because I just don't want to rush a guy like that.
I'll go as far as to say he's not in mine to begin the year. If he demands it with AAA through a couple months, then I'm very open to him being the next guy up. I don't even think I want to. And he can prove that wrong because, like you said, he is 24. It's not like you're talking about at Tink Hentz's age or Tink Hentz's innings count because they wanted to get him to 100 innings this year. It's not quite going to happen because of the injury that he suffered, was out like a month plus. So that is what it is. But Quinn Matthews is very much, I think, on the radar for later in 2025 for me. I'm going to tentatively say Matz, and because I as my 5th, because I don't think they're just automatically going to be able to move him and only have to eat 3 million of 12. Like I think you're eating at least half. I could be wrong about that. So, but they might be willing to do that too. And if they were, and you're just going internal options for that 5th and counting Palante as a 4th, step 1, people are going to go, well, that doesn't seem like a team that's going to make the playoffs. You might be right. Step 2, they couldn't do something like that this year because you kind of have to ebb and flow. You were coming off of a year where your rotation bottomed out, and they were like, we need to get solid, just really good floor plays for the rotation. Make sure we don't bottom out again. They haven't bottomed out. They haven't been great, but I would say they have not bottomed out. But they've also discovered that Palante might be able to be a guy that could give you 30 starts, and you could do a lot worse. Yeah. McGreevy, we've seen once. We would not have said coming into the year or even halfway through it that McGreevy was viable. But I agree almost with the notion of, hey, Cardinals fans, we have to reset the expectations. That's going to be the job of the front office, whoever's in charge, to say, look, last year it happened this way because we really thought we had the club. We went twice in a row and didn't quite get there. And so we are going to have to rethink. And that's going to give opportunity. You can frame it. It's all about PR. You can frame it in a way that's like, this year, we're going to do our due diligence and we're going to try to get Cardinal baseball back. But also, if it's going to happen, it's going to come from guys taking opportunities. And there is one. We're going to have a camp battle between these guys that we all feel like, you wouldn't say it out loud, but you're like, these all might be kind of quad A guys. They might be triple A guys that may never really amount at the big league level. If it's Liberatore or Zach Thompson and like, I almost don't think those guys would be at the forefront. It would be more the McGreevy, Graceffo, Kloffenstein, Robertson, who among that group, whoever takes it, just know like you're going to get April, but then whoever in AAA is performing the best, it's him. And that might not be a way to win the most possible games in 2025, but it could be a way to Cardinals still win 79 games, and they also learn more about who they have and who they don't have organizationally. And then the next year they can try and build it if they need to sign that year's Evaldi or whatever to fill the last spot.
Sure.
I know that's going to be super disappointing because people are like, well, it feels like we do this every year. And you do. The difference is this time they just need somebody to emerge because previously the versions of people that could have, which was this past year, it was McGreevy, Graceffo. They just stalled. They didn't move up. Yeah. Before that, and still last year, it was, well, now we're ready to see Thompson or Libby win it. And neither of them, right? So the difference is eventually you've got to develop a homegrown talent that becomes a mainstay in your rotation. Maybe Palante is that by accident, but one that's like a prospect that you thought could make the ascension, that's still kind of what they're waiting to see.
Yeah. And I think you're from your point, like it is a PR thing too, where I feel like fans have watched it the last few off seasons and it's felt like they've been trying to put Flex Seal on a sinking ship. And it kind of is like kept it floating enough that you could do it one more off season, one more off season, one more off season. And then it sunk and they thought the Flex Seal would bring it up and it really didn't. Instead, you're kind of going, hey, we're not. I honestly, it's when was the last time they really came into camp thinking a young guy was going to win a rotation spot? It's kind of been a while. It feels like they've brought in a patchwork options last few years to be like, hey, we don't trust any of these guys.
Yeah.
So maybe next year, but then next year rolls around and none of them have an opportunity again. So I kind of do think there's a little bit of that. But then offensively, too, it's like, hey, Jordan Walker is going to play every single day. And I don't care if he struggles, he's going to play again. He's going to play again. He's going to play again. And it's like, instead of kind of anticipating what are they going to do with these young guys and not get opportunity, I wonder if fans would actually be really interested in a year where it's like, hey, Nolan Gorman's going to play the whole year, Noop's going to play the whole year, Walker's going to play the whole year, JC's going to play a ton, and we're just going to let these guys see what they do. And there'll be the conversations are going to be different. It's not going to be a, hey, who are they going to add at the deadline? What exciting thing they're going to do? It's like, which of these young guys do we like? Which ones do they think maybe aren't a part of the core going forward? What do they need to go target in the offseason to make this team really good for 2026? I do think fans could maybe take a year or two of that and reset expectations because we haven't ever seen it tested here. Like, when was the last time there was a Cardinal team that kind of came into the year where the expectation wasn't a playoff team led by veterans? It was a young core that was kind of emerging for a couple years into the future.
Finding its own way, you know?
Yeah, and that's kind of fun to watch. Like I feel like their fan bases can really get behind a young team like that and then really invest in that. So I think early on it'll feel really, I don't know, it might feel icky to some people, but I actually think there's a lot of people who think it'd be a breath of fresh air. It's like, hey, there's some direction here. And that's what we're looking for. Is like, I actually don't think if they try to patchwork it again this offseason that people will like it. I think they would
Yeah.
and because sometimes I think the loudest of voices aren't necessarily a fair assumption of the fan base. But so I think when the past few years when it's like, go rebuild, I don't think people all like the consensus was like that. But I actually do think there's probably more of a consensus. It's like, hey, we'd rather see them take a little bit of a step back to build towards something if we see a clear vision than to kind of see if we can make it work again.
Yeah, and that could still be a year where you have attendance. You know what I mean? Like attendance
Yeah.
has been down this year, but and I don't know the exact way that you frame it, but that's what they're paid to figure out in the PR of it all. But it's been framed like this year was framed as we're going to get it back. This was an anomaly of 2023, and we're going to bring it back for the fan base that deserves it. And then like when that doesn't happen, people feel like they're sold a bill of goods. And like please just be honest with us. Like we see it, y'all have to see it internally, but you keep pretending like you don't. It would be, I don't know exactly, because you can't say, hey, we're taking a step back, we're not going to make the playoffs, because you could. That young
Yeah.
team could make the playoffs,
What?
but that might be the only way forward, might be to give themselves a little bit of grace of, we don't have to have a 36-year-old fifth starter. Maybe it's time to sink or swim on some of these guys, which will then allow us to take the next iteration of this team, knowing what we need and what we don't.
Yeah, and I like how you said it, like bring back Cardinal baseball, where it's like, what if it's Heim Bloom or like again, I think we've maybe talked about this. Like, I don't think anyone would buy an internal hire at this point, but like if it's Bloom or someone else, most steps aside, and the first message to come back is we need to bring back Cardinal baseball. We need to get back to a winning organization. It might take us a little bit of time here, but we're building toward, and they cast a vision of the preferred future of we're getting back to the glory days. I think people would be like, okay, like let's see this happen. And then they'd have more flexibility and room to say, hey, like maybe Michael McGreevy could, and like to see like the realistic expectations. The Cardinals are not trying to sell you Michael McGreevy is a mid to front end of the rotation starter. They're saying, hey, this guy could be a fourth starter, because if that's the case, we have some financial flexibility to go target that front end guy that we don't have. Or Quinn Matthews could emerge in that, and then now our rotation looks different than it did before. I think there's a way where you can sell it where you don't have to say, hey, we're not going to be good next year, but instead you're saying, hey, we're reframing the expectations as we're more concerned about building a sustainable product again, and not one that it kind of is that, but it's less than the, hey, let's get back in the playoffs every year and see what happens, but more let's build toward being a perennial contender again that people believe in.
And nothing is given in terms of playing. Everything's going to be earned, right?
Yeah.
Because right now it's always, well, the contract's going to win the day. And if there aren't as many of those, everybody's kind of more on a level playing field. The one issue with this, not turning into a total rebuild where it's like, oh, we see what this is. This is very much, and that can be fun too. There are teams that the young teams that build around that and they make a playoff run. And like the Royals have veterans right now because they've patchworked the right veterans to bring in, and that's been very effective for them. But they've gone from 56 wins to now they're going to be a playoff team. and
Yeah.
that's happened overnight. And then they bought very effectively at the deadline with guys like Urseg and De Jong,
Yeah.
and like they made really Michael Lorenzen's been good for
Yeah.
them in the rotation.
They also have one of the best shortstop seasons of all time in the middle of their lineup right
You
now
got to
too.
have studs. You
Yeah,
got to have
yeah,
some superstars, and he is the building block. Bobby Witt Jr. is the building block around which your franchise hinges. And the Cardinals don't quite have that level of somebody, and they did, but now they're kind of aging out of it a little bit. But the one thing that does make that tough, and if it goes this way, it goes this way, and maybe it would take a new Pobo to be the one to have to do the dirty, work so that the blood's going to be on his hands and it's just going to be what it is. But like, if I am Arenado and Sonny Gray looking at that and Wilson even, I'm like, all right, I better have some really good communicators in the front office to tell me what this is going to look like. Because if I'm Gray, I'm only under contract for 2 more years. You're telling me it's not going to be till 27 that this thing really kicks off? That's not going to fly. Arenado is going to want to win now. If that's the vision, it may. But there is also a world where Arenado sees like, all right, this young talent, it's me, it's Sonny, it's Wilson, and we gotta take some ownership of this. He's going to go one of two directions. His personality will dictate the way you want to fight through, or do you want to ask for a trade somewhere else? I'm not judging him either way, but
yeah.
that's, and look, that will be something that, okay, if you have to trade away an Arenado because that's what he wants, then whoever's in charge probably has to do that. And then you have to figure out, how do we fill third base? Is it going to go back to a Gorman? Is it, what is it? And then add from the outside. But that's a way that you would offer up payroll flexibility. But if that happened and everybody wanted to jump ship, and I'm not indicating any of them do, I have no idea. But those guys that are getting paid, what would happen if a new front office then could say, well, I have ideas on how we backfill that and replace those roles. If it was Mo, we would have very little faith, I think, that they could replicate the production with the new salary that they freed up by those trades. So that's the one thing that I think is a little bit interesting. And all of this idea flies in the face of the thing I was going to ask you about. When it comes to Goldschmidt and the platoon thing, I said it doesn't really work either because of the fact that he probably still wants to be an everyday guy, and it's hard to go have just an off season and now you come in and you're a bench bat, and like, how does that work from like a personality standpoint in the clubhouse? Do you know his OPS against lefties this year though?
It's like 120, right? It's pretty good.
He's a 814 OPS.
Oh, OPS. Sorry, I was thinking WRC plus in my
but
head.
WRC
Yeah,
plus
120 would be really bad OPS.
Yeah,
oh boy,
that would be rough. But no, that's, I mean, 814 OPS
Yeah.
against lefties. I could see it with him in Burleson, but I understand the reasons that it probably doesn't make sense. But anyway, any parting thoughts since we've gone like an hour?
Yeah, and feel free to be like, that's super dumb, doesn't make sense. But like, even if Nato's gone, is his production all that crazy to replace at this point when you're freeing up $30 million? Like, I know he is a 3-WAR player this year already, almost. So it's like he's not nothing, but like, when you're replacing the $32 million man right now, and he's not really living up his expectations, is that like that much of a hit to the club? Gray, I'm still a huge fan of, and I think he will be better going forward. Hopefully, I mean, age, you never know, but like, I mean, he is close to a 4 ERA this year too, so it's like he hasn't been the ace you necessarily wanted. Contreras is the one where I'm like, you go 140 WRC plus from your catcher, that's tough. But like, if you lost those two and you free up that money too, and again, if next year is more of a, hey, if we win and get in, then like that's a fun, exciting upward trajectory season. But then 2026, what does Nato look like? 2026, what does Gray look like? Maybe ripping the Band-Aid off next year does make more sense. And then you're not financially committed to those guys, and you can go after, I don't know. I mean, I don't ever, even with a new front office, don't necessarily think the Cardinals are going to go big game hunting.
Big splash,
but like, when was the last time, again, like, this is something I don't think they've had, that they've had no big contracts on their books. Like, maybe they would be a little bit more interested in going after someone when it's like, hey, the highest paid player on our team is a 3rd-year arbitration guy. Like, we don't have a big contract on the books.
And does that, I don't like the idea that, because I don't think it's quite accurate, but if you had no big contracts, it's like everybody's on the same playing field working toward the same thing. Because right now it's like, it's with Gray and Arenado, it's not that it's, and Goldie, you can throw him into that too, because he's still under that contract. It's not like those guys aren't working their tails off to try to be great, but there's also just this notion of, well, man, that's half the payroll or whatever between those 3 guys. And, what's the production? I don't think that's how anybody thinks about it in there, but it is something that you kind of look at and go, you could craft a narrative really easily around, hey, no, everybody here is in the same boat. We're all trying to cut our teeth in this league, and let's row the boat towards something. I don't know. It's all about framing and narrative stuff at that point, but it's going to be, it might not be as interesting of an offseason as people are hoping and thinking it will be, because they could maybe just not make a lot of changes. I think you have to probably make some coaching changes, but there's a chance that they have this same people in charge. I don't know how high of a chance that is, and I'm not going to even try to get into it because we're going to get to know in like a month and a half. So
Yeah.
it's going to maybe more like 2 months, but I do think there is going to be a lot of intrigue about the things that they do. So my point with that is subscribe to this YouTube channel and Philosophical Differences wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to Josh's other venture, Dealing the Cards, where they talk all things cards for fans, by fans, Wednesdays and Sundays. I believe y'all do your live streams over there. Any other parting thoughts, though, Josh, before we get out of here at the hour mark?
No, I'm interested to see how the Twins series goes in Padres, and I want to watch fun baseball. Like even if I don't necessarily think they're gonna make the playoffs, it would be fun to see. And then hey, string together 2 series. Maybe we do talk ourselves into. You're saying there's a chance.
Let's get delusional, baby. Let's get delusional next
But
Friday.
for those of you who think I'm there, I'm not. I'm not there yet. So don't come at me in the comments saying Josh is back already. I'm not back.
I said they'd sweep the Dodgers series. So
you did, yeah. And I was like, I was borderline saying they're gonna get swept. So
they played good though.
They
Kinda.
did. Like you're right. They honestly could have won any of the 3. I mean, they won 1, but they could have won all 3 games. It was kind of wild.
Should have won Friday for sure, and then that slipped away from them. And then Sunday, sometimes you can't win if you don't score. I've been told that. All right, that'll do it for this episode. Make sure you tell your friends, everybody that's a Cardinals fan in your life. You're like, hey, this is the podcast that you need to be listening to every Friday with Brenden and Josh. But appreciate you all for watching, for listening, and we will talk to you next time on Philosophical Differences. Peace.